The president, his internal struggles, public pressure, and a covert army in Afghanistan. If it all sounds like a juicy book, you're right. Obama's Wars by journalist Bob Woodward tells the story of a president in turmoil, fighting not only to get out of Afghanistan, but fighting with his own inner circle. The president says, quote, "I have 2 years with the public on this. And later, I want an exit strategy." But he didn't get it. The book also shows a lot of strong personalities. Vice President Joe Biden calling Richard Holbrooke, the special rep for Afghanistan and Pakistan, the most egotistical bastard I've ever met. Christopher A. Preble is Director of Foreign Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, and he's written extensively on war strategy. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, President Obama is quoted as saying, this is a direct quote from the book, "This needs to be a plan about how we're going to hand off and get out of Afghanistan." Then he repeatedly apparently pushed his top military advisors for an exit plan. They didn't give it to him. Does this, in a way, summarize the dilemma overall, this infighting about Afghanistan?
I think it does. I think people are seem apparently shocked that there's infighting in the White House. I'd be disappointed if there wasn't infighting in the White House. This is a badly flawed strategy. It has a number of holes in it, not least of which is it's not properly resourced. If you were really serious about standing up a functioning nation state in Afghanistan, which is our professed goal, you can't do it with even 100,000 troops. You need far more troops, and you need to be there for a very, very long time.
And in fact, that's exactly what General Petraeus said, and I'm going to ask our graphics folks to skip ahead to the quote from General Petraeus from this book. He apparently said to the president, quote, "You have to recognize also that I don't think you win this war. I think you keep fighting. This is the kind of fight we're in for the rest of our lives and probably our kids' lives at the same time." The president has already said, look, this can't be a war without end. Right. Among other things, I'll lose the Democratic Party. He got to be president in part on saying, I'm going to get us out of here. So is it a surprise that General David Petraeus is the guy that's been moved into Afghanistan?
Well, of course, the circumstances of how he ended up there, we remember the McChrystal firing and what happened from another juicy story there. So, I mean,
so the president didn't have an alternative?
Not in the short term. I really genuinely believe that was the right decision in the short term. But it's true. David Petraeus, better than perhaps anyone on the planet, understands the complexities and the difficulty in fighting counterinsurgency. Heck, he wrote the book, right? So he wrote the book on counterinsurgency, and his own book, the Field Manual on Counterinsurgency, says you need hundreds of thousands of troops for a country the size of Afghanistan. You need to stay there for a very, very long time, and you need a credible local partner. I think President Obama understands that the American people are not going to support an endless war with hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground. He tried for something less than that, but I think from the very beginning, many of us questioned whether a better approach would have been to change the objectives, to focus very narrowly and tightly on al-Qaeda, on the folks who killed us in 9/11 and want to do it again, killed Americans, want to do it again. You do not need 100,000 troops on the ground in Afghanistan to hunt a couple hundred al-Qaeda figures. That's an argument that's been made and was made in the course of the president's strategic review. For some reason, he decided to add troops instead.
I also want to bring in Harold Ford Jr., former congressman from Tennessee. And you also, as I understand, Harold, were on a group within Congress that looked at Defense Department needs, the Transformation Advisory Group. So you have a White House that is in the middle of this push and pull. And I think it's not unique to this White House. You're in the middle of a war. There are military considerations and there are political considerations. But it seems as though, at least at some point, people weren't listening to this president. Give me a plan, get me out of here, and he has to write his own plan. What do you make of that?
I think the tension in the conversation was a healthy one. As you said, this is not unusual for these kind of conversations to happen with top-level military advisors and national security advisors. I think there's an element, and I listened to my friend, the director Cato, make the case that maybe the focus and the mission should have been redefined. A smaller force could be used to accomplish the goal of limiting al-Qaeda's growth and even quelling what they have now. I think there's a another fundamental problem. The president clearly was dealing with it. It's the fact that the will of the American people, in so many ways, is focused on other objectives, namely jobs and the economy. Two, these wars have lasted so long
and cost so much.
And there seems to be, it's hard to measure our success there. And then month after month or quarter after quarter, you hear the President Karzai making statements that at best are confusing and worse seem counter to what we
Let me ask you about that,
here.
because this is another fascinating statement in this book. According to Bob Woodward, there is U.S. intelligence that says that Hamid Karzai is manic depressive. And there are jokes that are made about, you know, he's off his meds, he's on his meds, he's off his meds. This was one of our stated goals. When people say, you know, what's the end game here? One of the stated goals is that we have a stable government there. What do you think about that? Hamid Karzai, manic depressive. I mean, it probably wouldn't surprise people who have seen his mood swings.
I've not been to Afghanistan in almost 4 years now. When I was in Congress, I went on almost a dozen trips to the region. He struck me as a rational guy dealing with a set of irrational pulls in so many different directions. He may be those things. All of that contributes to, I think, a mood within the country and amongst the American people who have to support this effort that at best leads us to kind of uneven support for this war. Ultimately, come 2011, if the president is to be believed, Woodward has it right, is saying, look, we have to begin to look for how we withdraw. It's clear that his general on the ground, commanding general on the ground, says, no, this is a decades, if not generations old challenge, or a challenge that will require generations of American commitment. We'll have to see where we are in 2011. And if the jobs picture in the economy has not improved, it's my belief that the president will be left with probably the toughest political decision the president's had in decades. Do you go into an election cycle in 2012 saying you're going to maintain our current force levels, or do you begin to rethink, as perhaps the director of the Cato Foreign Policy Institute has laid out, a different mission with a reduced force level there, and perhaps a more achievable set of goals?
I want to ask you, we're out of time, but I want to ask you both to comment briefly on this simple question, which is, was this a smart idea? And there's a great article about this in Politico today, because Bob Woodward was given this incredible access. One of the things that one of the top advisors told them was, instead of thinking, I'm talking to Bob Woodward, I'd better be careful, sources tend to think, I'm talking to Bob Woodward, I better tell him something good. Is this a good idea? Was it, obviously it's always a calculated risk, was it a risk worth taking to invite Bob Woodward in to talk to top people in the administration in the middle of war planning?
Maybe not, in light of the political considerations and what's happening politically now. But Bob Woodward, amazingly, has gotten access to the last couple of presidents, the last president as he developed his war strategy, right, and was able to discover, reveal, and put a light, illuminate what differences may have been. I think the most amazing thing for those who are watching this outside of the United States is we can have these internal discussions, we can have these internal debates. In a lot of countries, you would have those who lost out in the debate defecting from government and maybe even attempting a coup. In our country, people come together. People may say terrible things about one of their partners or allies in that room or in the war council or war council meetings, and then come out as one group saying, here's where we're going and here's how we're going to do it. In a lot of ways, it magnifies and shows the world the strength of American foreign policy making, even if we don't get all the ideas right.
Christopher, we've got just a second. Your comment about that.
I mean, this is not the first president that has thought that by inviting Bob Woodward in, you're going to get a good story out of it, and I think Bob Woodward is a good storyteller. It doesn't always mean that it's good for the White House.
Christopher Preble, Harold Ford Jr., thank you, gentlemen.